All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks to those of you who are on the meeting today. For those of you who are joining on, or if you join on later, or you're listening to the recording, just know that this whole webinar is being recorded so that not only those of you who couldn't make it today could watch it, but also so that you could go back and reference this recording if any other questions arose throughout the process. But yeah, I want to introduce myself first. My name is Abigail Chapman. I play a couple different roles at OCRA, one of them being that I work with our Indiana Main Street State Coordinating Program as the manager of outreach and organization. But also, as many of you know, I have recently jumped into a part-time position with our CDBG team, working with the economic development grants and loans to small businesses. So it's been great getting to know many of you through this process and getting to learn and grow with each of you. And so before we jump into some of the content today, I did just want to go over a few housekeeping rules. As I said before, we are recording this meeting. It will be housed on our website, and I'll make sure to send a follow-up email after once we get the recording generated and with a few of the resources that I mentioned today. And that way it's kind of a recap of what we discussed today. You are all currently on mute, but when it is time at the end of kind of the end of the content sharing, and we're ready to have some questions, there's a couple of different options. Number one, you'll see the little raised hand option on your screen if you're on a computer. And that's one option to ask a question at the end. Kelly will unmute you, and then you can ask your question. And the other option is that we do have also a Q&A box that should be available to you. So if you, for some reason, either don't want to speak your question out loud or you can't because of technology, feel free to use that Q&A box at the bottom, and we will get your questions answered. So I think that's about it for the WebEx housekeeping rules. The way we're going to kind of go through things today is I'm mostly just going to do an update on the newly established HUD guidelines and sort of your two different options for uploading your document, your LMI verification documentation. It's a mouthful. To me, many of you took part in phase one. And if you did, you know, we kind of did things one way, and now we've received some updated guidelines. And so this is kind of just to help everyone get on the same page, and so that you know your options, as well as you know, just the process of what needs to go to me for your documentation. We want your businesses to get their funds, as quickly as possible. And so we want to make sure we're communicating the process to you all so that you can feel like it goes smoothly and that you have all of your questions answered. I do want to say that I'm not going to get super into the weeds regarding, all what needs to go into the grants management system, what needs to go to our grant services team regarding FEEPs and things like that, because I know they have sent you all a few resources. I know they created a FEEPs guide and some other resources that can be helpful to you in that, especially if you're unfamiliar with sort of some of the community development block grant documentation requirements. So I'm not going to get super in the details of that today because we have such a great grant services team who will be able to answer your questions better than I would. And so I will make sure in the follow-up email to send, their contact information as well as a link to that FEEPS guide, so that if you do have any questions regarding that, you feel like you know where to go and what to do for that. So as I said, I'm mostly going to just be going over the updated guidelines, and then I'll be kind of showing the two different forms that you can use to help gather that LMI data. So that being said, I think we can go ahead and get started and kind of start out with what these new guidelines had stated. So on August 10th, we got notification from HUD that they had kind of released some new updated guidelines of what was needed for specifically that would impact these economic development grants or economic impact grants. So I will say this also, if you are a community or, you are a grant administrator who did have a community in phase one. Hopefully you know this, but this does not change anything you did in phase one. If you've got your release of funds, or even if you're still in the process and you're already working with the original like FTE sheet, how we were doing things originally, this does not impact you. You can keep moving forward in that way. I just wanted to clarify that because we didn't want anyone to feel like, oh no, we have to go back and change things. You certainly do not. This is supposed to be a really helpful update, and we're really excited about it. And so just wanted to say that first and foremost. I'm pretty sure most of you that are here today are our phase two grantees or grant administrators or whoever it is that's running your program. But I just wanted to make sure to say that so that was cleared up. So in phase one, we had asked that the LMI verification be found through income verification forms. So there was these forms that each employee had to fill out that they had to give their household income. So through those, as well as a full-time equivalent sheet. So we called it the FTE sheet, which was something that our team created so that it was easier calculated. You wouldn't have to calculate it on your own. We had an Excel doc, and I'm going to go ahead and actually show that to you now. Let's see if this works here. Pull up the FTE sheet. Hopefully you can see that. Kelly, please feel free to speak up if for some reason my screen isn't showing up on the correct one. But this is the FTE sheet. So this is what we had asked in phase one for you all to send in. So this allowed for the part-time and full-time employees to be calculated properly and the aggregate LMI calculated for verification. So if you see here on the sheet, we have obviously the business name. This is all an example, but a business name, employee initials, or a code for an employee. And then you had what that business considered full-time hours, what that employee worked on average, how many hours they worked a week. And then from there, the sheet calculated it automatically. And then you put in whether or not they were an LMI individual based on their household income. So this was based on their entire household income. And then from there, the sheet would calculate through the aggregate your LMI. So whether you were over that 51%, and obviously in this example, this example community, they were, because they were about 0.56. So that was kind of how we did things in phase one. So when HUD released this updated information, it stated that grantees may consider individuals that apply for or hold jobs to be members of one-person families for activities that prevent, prepare for, and respond to COVID-19. So what this means for us is that HUD will consider the person income qualified if the annual wage or salary of the job is equal to or less than the Section 8 low income limit established by HUD. So I'll get into more of that. I'm going to switch over real quick to the new form, but I'm not going to get into it quite yet because I just want to explain kind of what this means before I get into this new form. So as I said before, when we were using the FTE sheet, you were having to gather their household income. You weren't going just off what that person made from that job. You were going off their entire household income. So now with these newly updated guidelines, now what we're looking at is we don't need to know how many hours they worked a week. We don't need to know any of that. All we need to know is, again, their employee initials or code. I will say that I know some communities have reached out saying that they, for privacy reasons, they didn't want to share initials. That is totally fine. Feel free to use like numbers or coding as long as you kind of know what that coding is, or the business does. So I just wanted to make a point to say that. But also, you'll need to know the job type. So for this example, this is a restaurant. So typically you're going to have like servers and hostesses and such. So this person's a server. So, I mean, really, it can just be the general, what their role falls under. Down here, you'll see there's a custodian, someone who's a customer service associate, things like that. And so don't get too caught up in that. Whatever that their role is and kind of the general role that they play at that business just needs to be noted here. And then this is the part that's really different, is obviously now we're looking at their average annual income just from that position. So that employee, now we're not looking at their household income. We don't have to use those income verification forms anymore. Now all we need to know is how much is that person making from their position at this small business. So at this person, obviously, who's working at the restaurant, he's making $6,000 a year. He might have another job. His spouse might have another job, whatever. But he, at this position, is only making $6,000 a year. And so because of that, I don't have a specific county that I was using as an example here, but then they would go to the HUD income limits, which I will make sure to, I've linked it several places for people to reference. And most likely, if you've worked with HUD funds before and our CDBG funds, you know how to access the HUD income limits 2020 income limits form, where you can go to your county and you would look at one person family at 80%. And so I would look at that for whatever county this person lived in. And then I would say, okay, they make $6,000. Most likely that's going to be quite a bit less than what their one person family for at 80% is. And so he is going to be LMI. So then I would just go over here and mark, yep, he's LMI number one. If he wasn't LMI, if he didn't reach that equal to or less than, then I would say he's a 0 for not LMI. So obviously you can see there's a few examples here where it shows that they're not. So hopefully that gives some clarification in terms of just the difference between what was needed for the FTE sheet and our previous guidelines that we are going with and the ones that are now updated. We're really excited about this, mostly because we believe that, number one, this will be easier information, hopefully, to gather. You don't have to use the income verification forms. Really, I've highlighted here in yellow what you'll need to grab from the businesses when you're using this updated form. Also, I would like to note that this form goes through step-by-step instructions. So obviously, if anything comes up, if you have a question, you can always feel free to reach out, but there's really clear instructions here at the top. I believe I've even linked to that HUD 2020 income limits so that you can pull that up. I'll make sure to send that in the follow-up email as well. But that's all there at the top. So these three things really here highlighted in yellow is what you'll need to have from the businesses. I would say that many of you, especially if you took part in phase 1, you probably already have a process in place of how you want to gather whatever information you need from the businesses for documentation. But I would say that if this is your first time doing this, or if you're wanting to update your process and make it a little bit more smoother, I think it's okay to ask the businesses for some of this information up front, even if you don't know for sure if you're going to award them as you're kind of going through applications and figuring out who you're going to award. I think it's nice to just have, either a separate forum, just asking for this. That way, whoever's job it is to fill this form out to send back to me, it's a lot easier for you just to go in and put this information in. You'll have to obviously go through the LMI and check that, but then it calculates it automatically for you over here. So there's a separate calculation sheet tab for you to put in all your information, since this is just the instruction sheet and example. So hopefully you can kind of tell the difference. If for some reason you really feel like you'd rather use the FTE sheet in the original way we were doing things, please feel free. I just think that what we're going to see using the new updated guidelines and using this, it's called the CDBG CD Economic Recovery Income Verification Form. Also a large mouthful of words. Using this process and this form, I think is going to allow for more people to meet that LMI standard, as well as for you to fund more businesses, which is what we want. It's what HUD wants. And we're really excited about that. And I think that will be really helpful for a lot of these businesses that, their household income might be a little bit over, what the LMI standard was, or whatever the situation may be. we also had a lot of people reaching out saying, they were bummed because there was a lot of high school students, a lot of college students who still lived at home. But really, I mean, they themselves were kind of, this was their income. This is what they were living off of, even if they still did live at home. And this new process will really mitigate any issues with that, because now that you're not looking at what their parents' income is, not their household, you're just looking at what they're making from that position on average yearly. So I think that will be really great as well, just because it will allow for those people who fall in that situation to be able to be considered LMI, and maybe that business, especially those businesses that have a lot of high school or college age students employed, hopefully be able to be considered. So hopefully that makes sense. This form is very straightforward. I'm not going to go through step by step, just because it's pretty straightforward, gathering the name of the business, the employee code, the job type, whatever job that the role that they play at that business, and then their average annual income from that position. And then you will fill out that LMI 1 for yes, 0 for no. I'm also not going to go through the FTE sheet super in detail. We do have a recording on the website that has a recording of me going through the instructions for the FTE sheet. If you are, for some reason, interested in using that, just remember that if you do use that process instead, you will have to have the income verification forms and still follow all of that. So just be aware of that. So that being said, that kind of overall covers the newer guidelines and kind of what we're asking from those guidelines. In terms of the process in which, you're gathering this, as I said before, we trust you at the local level to follow whatever process you need to in terms of getting your local application out there for businesses to apply, and then choosing what applicants you want to award. And then the process even in which you gather this needed documentation from the businesses. So as I said, I would suggest just gathering it kind of from the start, but some businesses might not want to share this information unless they know they're going to get awarded. So if you want to just wait until you choose your businesses that you're going to award and then send out kind of a form for them to fill all this information out, and then you will fill this out and send it to me. So I do want to definitely emphasize that it should not be the individual businesses sending this information to me, mostly because unfortunately that would overdrive my email and I wouldn't be able to probably keep track. This needs to kind of be whoever's running the program sends me all together. It's fine if you're doing it even in rounds. So if you're kind of awarding a few at a time, that's totally okay. What you'll do is you'll just fill out the businesses that you're awarding at that point that you want to draw money for, and then I'll just approve as we go. So the process, especially for those of you who did not take part in phase 1, the process looks a little bit like, you'll pick your awarded businesses, no matter if you're drawing the funds all at once or you're drawing them in chunks. No matter what, you will obviously make sure that you're following all the needed documentation on the grant services side. So as I said, I'm not going to get too much in the details of that today, but just make sure that you're staying in contact with them. If you have any questions, obviously your community liaison is a great resource also to help you through that process, and just making sure that you have everything you need in the grants management system. But then once you're ready and you're like, okay, we have the businesses we're going to award, I have this full, form filled out, and we know, that our aggregates over that 0.51, then what you'll do is you will save this form and you'll send that as well as any of the awarded applications to me, and preferably please CC and your community liaison. That way they can know as they're kind of making sure, helping everyone stay on track. Or you can send it to your community liaison first and then they'll forward it to me, whatever works for you. But you'll send me this form filled out as well as your local applications of the businesses that you're going to award. So The reason that we ask for the applications is really just because it gives us the why behind why the business needs this money. So many of you in your local applications will ask, how did COVID-19 impact your business? And that's really what we're looking for, just to see them say, we've lost employees, or we had to shut down for like a couple months, or we had to move to carry out, which impacted, this and that. It totally doesn't matter what they say, as long as we know, obviously, and see, okay, yes, this really impacted them. They need these funds. This is, going to help retain jobs. It's going to help keep the business open, which is what we want, obviously. So that's why I asked for the applications. If for some reason you don't want to send me like the full applications, or maybe you didn't ask that question outright on the application, then some communities, not many, but a few, have sent me like letters from the business owners explaining the why. So, we needed these funds because of this. And they just wrote like a little quick 2 or 3 sentence why to me and they just forwarded me those documents. So that's another option. I would say it's probably easier for you just to send me the application if that's already on your application, which I am sure that it probably is. If any of you do have questions about like what should be on my application, our local application that the businesses fill out, especially if, again, you're new to this process in phase 2, we do have an example. I believe it's on our website, but I'll make sure to send it in my follow-up email as well. And it's just an example of like, here might be some good questions to ask on your local application if you just haven't developed one yet. So I'll make sure to send that as well. Let me make sure. Okay, so I did want to real quick also mention, you'll see on here that I have like a micro enterprise example. Micro enterprises, they will also use the above updated process of using the average annual income from the position with the 1-person family at 80%. So they will pretty much be the same, but just remember that if the owner is LMI, if the owner meets that, then they're covered. The business is covered. If the owner does not meet the LMI, then you will need to like look at their other employees and see, if with them, if they do. So just wanted to make sure we mentioned the micro enterprise, because I know that got, a lot of people had questions about that, but they're treated very similarly to other businesses. Just know that if the owner meets the LMI, then that covers their whole business, and they will follow the same exact. So if the owner of that micro enterprise, even if they have another side hustle, or, their spouse has an income, still is the same for them in this situation, where you'll just take their average annual income from their position from that micro enterprise. You're not looking at anything else. So they're not really treated any differently, which is nice. Other than the fact that if their LMI covers their business. And many of them, sometimes it's just them and one other person or something like that. So I'm trying to make sure I hit everything I wanted to hit. Yeah, I think I did. I'm making sure, reading through my notes. But I'm sure that we might have some questions. So before we jump into that, just again, I will make sure to send this form, this new form that I'm sure probably majority of you will use. I would think that most of you will choose to use these new updated guidelines just because they will be more inclusive, and we're really excited about that. And we're really, just excited to see the ways that might impact being able to fund more businesses. But just as a reminder, hopefully you can see this is the FTE calculation sheet. It's still an option, again, if you want to do it that way. And if you have any questions about that, obviously you can ask here in a moment. So I think I will go ahead. Kelly, do we have any hands raised? And then I'll get to the Q&A box.
Adam, you have a question? Adam Rude?
Is he on mute, Kelly?
I just unmuted him.
Okay.
Let's try.
Hello,
Adam?
can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry about that.
Nice.
My question was just about whether the LMI so are we considering LMI as an aggregate of the entire program, or if a specific business does not meet that threshold, can we not award to that business?
So yeah, the nice thing about these forms is it takes in the aggregate.
Okay.
So you could, as long as your aggregate meets that. So you just want to be careful that you're not like, I guess, awarding multiple businesses that don't meet the LMI because you might accidentally drag down your overall aggregate.
Okay.
But if there's a couple that you're like, okay, I think we're going to meet this and it's going to be okay, then that's okay to put them in there because we do calculate what this sheet calculates the aggregate. Also just be mindful of the fact that you're, depending on whether you're just going to you're going to draw all the funds out at once, like award the businesses and then be done, or if you're going to do them in rounds. So it might be a smaller amount. Just be mindful of that also. But yeah, this does take the aggregate, which is helpful. That way we can hopefully fund some businesses who maybe don't even meet that. But overall they do because the aggregate number does. Does that help?
Yes, and I guess real quick, does it is it an aggregate of each drawdown, or is it overall program? If we send you a drawdown and it's 47%, but our last one was 70%, are you guys going to run that on the back end, or do we need to adjust those drawdowns?
So the way I've been doing it is like if you were at 47% I do them by each drawdown. I don't do them overall. So if I was to see, you were in the red on one of them, I would probably, how I've been doing it is I would not be able to. I know I believe Eric Ogle's on with us today. And Eric, I don't know if you have any other thoughts about that, but the way I do it is like we would consider that you didn't meet the LMI for that drawdown, so we wouldn't be able to fund that round essentially. We didn't have any issues with that in phase one, if that makes you feel better, that there wasn't any issues with that. I never had anyone who, even when they did drawdowns, not meet the LMI, but yeah, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Cindy Todd, you had a question? Cindy? Anna Walker?
Hi, yes, we're here at the Jennings County EDC. We had just a couple questions. One of them was, and I just wanted to clarify because I had asked in an email earlier on. Some of our businesses have in our application they had multiple things like operational expenses, payroll, and things like that that they could request funds for. Some of them would only wanted to request funds for their operating expenses, not to cover payroll. In that case, would they need to submit their employee status since they're not requesting funds to cover employee payroll?
Yes, they still will need to, only because really what we're looking at is even if they're not using the funds towards payroll, the operating funds ultimately keep the business open, which in turn keeps jobs retained. And so really HUD is always looking at that job retention, is it keeping jobs? So you will still need to send that in because of that.
Okay, we kind of misunderstood because earlier we had asked when that it was only the employees that wanted to be retained via LMI, but I guess I understand where you're coming from if it's going to keep the business open. Okay, thank you. And then my second question was kind of early on when the grant process first started, there was a process document that had I guess the awardees being presented to OCRA, and that was that at that point this Friday. Has that changed, or are we still kind of following along that, or is there an adjusted time frame?
Oh, that you needed to know who you were going to award by this Friday. Is that what you're?
Yeah.
So at this time that hasn't changed, but we've heard some feedback about that. So, Eric, I don't know if Kelly, is Eric on?
I don't believe so, Abby.
Okay, so that's no worries. So what I'll do is I've heard a few different comments of feedback on that. Let me go back and bring it to Eric, and we'll kind of talk through that, and we will send some updated timelines upon our discussion about that, because I know that a few people don't feel ready to do that by this Friday. So yeah, I'll send that in the follow-up email once I get an answer to that, if that works for you.
Yeah, thank you. That we really appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thanks for your questions.
Thank you.
And Cindy, if you want, feel free to stick any of your questions in the Q&A box. If you can't get your technology to work, I'm happy to answer it from there. But Kelly, I didn't know if there are any other questions before I get into the Q&A box.
Okay. We do have Gary Norman.
Okay.
Hello, this is Gary Norman with Ripley County Economic Development. Actually, the county is going to be the administrator of the funds, but we will be doing the administration of it. And the question is that the drawdown of funds, we don't want to send, every little business. So can we do it in several tranches, like maybe 2 or 3 tranches of that to get those funds back? And what is the timeline as far as the turnaround time?
Yeah, so you're just asking if you can do smaller chunks of businesses. Yes. Yeah. Yes, you can certainly do that. We've had a lot of communities decide to do that just because it worked better for their process. And so you can do that. We're very hesitant on giving turnaround times indefinitely because our grant services team is pretty low capacity right now, and they're working really hard to stay up to date. And then from there, obviously, things go to the auditor's office, and it's a bit out of our hands. But I believe, it can be anywhere from 30 days or so to get your funds. Once you do the whole release of funds in terms of drawing it out in chunks like that. So I will get I'll try to get a verified timeline from our grant services team, but I would say, you're going to expect at least 30 days to get and make sure you have and that's assuming you have everything in ready to get the release of funds to then get them and be able to give it out to your businesses. So yeah, does that help? I'll try to get a more confirmed answer on that, but we try not to give too definite timelines just because of their limited capacity.
No, absolutely, totally understand. But we want to, if we're going to award funds, we want to give at least them a timeline.
Sure.
And
yeah.
I don't think it'll be an issue for Ripley County to get the money out there, and because of the aggregates, it should not be an issue. But we don't want to send the county auditor, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. Right. And many of those, we would like to do them in like a lump to avoid for them to have that much more work and the timeline. So if we can do it in maybe thirds in that amount. So we just wanted to give the businesses a timeline of when they expect those funds, because it'll have to run through 2 sources. One's through the county and then back through us and back to them. So we want to have a reasonable timeline. So yeah.
Sure. No, that totally makes sense. And we know a lot of you are, have the same thing where you want to be able to give your businesses a clear timeline so they know what to prepare for. So So yeah, I will do my best to communicate those timelines to you all as you reach out and ask, especially, yeah, and try to be as communicative about that as we can. So hopefully that helped.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, no problem.
Jody Comer.
This is Mary McCarty, and I'm with the staff. This is Jody and 2 other staff members, and we have a couple questions.
Sure.
One is, so the CDBG, the new form that you presented today,
Yeah.
do we submit that once when we submit the draw? Do we have to collect income verification any other times after that, or is it just that one initial time?
Okay, so if I'm understanding your question correctly, if you're asking that, do you just send this the one time to me and that's it? Or do you send it each time you draw out funds? Is that what you're asking?
No, what I'm asking is if we send it the initial time, I know we submit that with a claim. But like for some other things, you have to make sure that people remain low income. Do we ever have to verify any income again? Or do we
Okay.
Yeah.
So more so for reporting
Yes.
purposes, you won't have to probably ever send this form again. I believe for reporting, and I know our grant services team will kind of walk you through some of that when the time comes. But I believe that it'll just be, I mean, you'll kind of know what you're looking for in terms of reporting, but you won't have to send this form to me again, or upload it. Does that answer your question?
It does. I'm just thinking when we're working with the businesses, if they need to know that they may need to present us income documentation 2-3 years down the road, we need to let them know that now.
Yes. And what I'll do is when I send up the follow-up email, I will there's just a short little like reporting documentation list that I send to people who ask about it. So that way you guys know, just so, especially if any of you are new to phase 2, especially, you know what to be looking for and what to be keeping track of for reporting. So I'll send that in the follow-up email as well.
That would be helpful. And then my other question is, I think you may have answered it, but maybe I just didn't understand it. So when we fill out this form and you're collecting the income, the businesses report what those average annual income is for those positions. What sort of documentation are you looking for?
This is really for us the only documentation that is needed. So the businesses just need to tell you what that.
Okay, so you're just going on their word. There's nothing that we need to
exactly. Yep. So you can, for your own personal purposes, if you want to send them like a Word document asking them these questions, or whatever, however you want to go about it, I think it's good to have that more so for reporting purposes. And so what they, but for us, we just need to know what they say that their average annual income is, and then it's what we go off of. So yeah.
Okay. I think that's my questions. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Debbie Bennett.
Oh, I'm on there now?
Yep, we hear you.
Okay. I typed in my question, but I'll go ahead and ask it.
Oh,
and
sure.
I think you were kind of talking about it a minute ago. My question is about the reporting.
Mm-hmm.
So in round 1, which we're done with at this point, the grants,
right.
The reporting was stated it would be once a year after the award for a total of 2 years.
Correct.
And if I'm reading the grant agreement right, that was just sent out for phase 2, they just want semi-annual reports until the grant is closed. Is there any annual reporting after the close of the grant?
I don't believe so. No, that is correct. Okay. You got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Abby, I think that was all the hand raised, and I believe that Tara Hagan had typed a question in to the Q&A.
Perfect. Let's pull up the Q&A so that I can kind of look here. Oh yeah. Okay. So I'm going to start up at the top, and I'll get to yours, Tara. But I'm going to start with Matt Brinkman. Looks like he put one in. So Matt, you asked, does this mean we use the 1-person household income limits for each position, regardless of how many people live in the household of the employee? Essentially, can we ignore the income limits for multiple person households? Is this correct? Matt, yes, that is correct. So you don't even have to think about who else is in their household, how much money their household as a total makes per year. You're literally just looking at that one person in that one position. So they might even have several jobs, but we're really only looking at that job. So hopefully that helps answer your question, Matt. If not, feel free to stick another one in the Q&A, or you're all always welcome to send me a follow-up email, schedule a call. I do my best to keep up as best as I can and try to, help you all in any way that I can. So, okay. So my next question in the Q&A box, this is from Adam, which Adam, I don't know. I know you asked me a question. Let's see, I'm trying to see if it's does the LMI requirement program? Oh yeah. Okay. We already talked about that. So that's good. And then Cindy, you asked, are all claims required to be submitted by October 2nd? This was from the original PowerPoint. Yeah, so I kind of mentioned a moment ago when we were talking about the timeline, even about, having your awarded grantees by this Friday, your local grantees. We'll all make sure to kind of go through and send the official timeline. I've gotten some comments about where everybody's at, and I'm going to take those into consideration, and then I'll bring it back to the team and we'll kind of go through that. So I'll get more clarification on that once I can talk to Eric about that. Let's see here. Tennille, you asked, can you confirm business applicants that were funded in phase 1 are not eligible for phase 2? So I believe that is correct. I want to double check that with Eric. It would mostly be because of duplicative funding. So like if, they received funding, then they couldn't receive it again. But I might be wrong about that. And I've had some other questions about that. So I will get that clarified from Eric and send that also in the follow-up email to you all. Let's see how else we're at here. Oops. Okay, so Tara, is phase 2 putting the town, county, et cetera, in a reimbursable situation like phase 1? So payments will be paid out and then the town, city. Yes, you can still do reimbursements if that's what works for you. That process is still consistent with phase 2 as it was in phase 1. How will we report beneficiary information on the individuals now that we're not receiving income verification forms? Can we? Okay, sorry, hold on. Just keeping up with the questions here. Tara, you also asked how will we report beneficiary information on the individuals now that we are not receiving income verification forms? That's a good question. Let me double check that one with Eric as well. Because that might be something, as we're always learning with this program, there might be things that we need to add to the process and make sure that we have a place to make sure that those kinds of things are checked. But yeah, let me check with Eric on that question, Tara, and I will get an answer to you as soon as possible. And then Tim Eckerly, can we use this grant to refinance an existing RLF loan, assuming that they meet LMI? Also a great question. As you can tell, I am still learning and always leaning on Eric as well as we lean on HUD. Some of these are just, we have to double check with HUD and make sure that we're staying in line with what they need. I would think that's okay, Tim, but let me double check with Eric before I give you a final answer. So Tara and Tim, and I'm trying to think if there's anyone else that I need to double check with Eric on. He was supposed to be on today, but I think he had something else come up. So we'll make sure to get those questions answered for you all. And I'll try to kind of keep also a running FAQ. That way, if anyone else has similar questions down the road, we have these kind of answered. Yeah, so I don't see any other ones in the Q&A. Kelly, were there any other raised hands?
I don't see any, Abby.
Okay. Well, I appreciate each of you being on today. You know, as I said before, I think we're all learning and growing through this. And I know, you know, for me, even being new to the CDBG team, I'm always learning and always having to ask a lot of questions. So know that I always appreciate all of your questions, all of you always feeling like you can reach out, and we're really glad about that. Obviously, in the follow-up email, I'll make sure to share your community liaison contact information, but you should probably already have that most likely. Your community liaisons are always there to help answer questions as well as connect you to our team if you have any specific questions for us. I'm always available if you have a question, if you just need something clarified. And, you know, if I don't know it, I will always work my best to get an answer to you from Eric or from HUD as soon as possible. So thank you to each of you again for being on here today. Thank you to those of you who are watching the recording later on. And I'm really excited about phase 2 and those of you who are finishing up your phase 1 as well. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your Monday, and I'm sure I'll be speaking with you all soon. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.